righty. Well, good morning again. For everybody who is here today, welcome. Happy Memorial Day weekend. For those watching online, welcome. If this is your first time watching online and you'd love to connect with us, we'd love you to send us a message on Facebook so we can best know how to serve you. But man, what an incredible way just to celebrate. I love when we have baptism. I love just the last 3 weeks. It's been awesome. We've had baby dedication. We had graduate recognition. We've had baptisms. It's just incredible what God is doing. We've seen 30 people now step from death to life and be baptized, and so that's just incredible in this short of a time. And so I'm just excited. If you're visiting for the first time today, we're wrapping up a series we've been in for the last 4 weeks called Daniel, so don't freak out. I'm going to catch you up. But in this study, we've been talking about what it means simply to have an uncommon faith in an ever-compromising world. And truly, I believe, like the last thing we sang, he says, I must butcher this because, gosh, what did he say? Come on, help me out. He just said, basically, he just said, you're here with me. Whom shall I fear? Because you're with me. That really is the underlying principle that fueled Daniel and his buddies' lives. They had this unrelenting belief that whom shall I fear? That God of the universe is with me. And so, if to kind of play cliff notes, because this is a long chapter, Israel, nation of Israel, and specifically the tribe of Judah, had been, God had raised up prophets for generations to tell them, stop rebelling or there's going to be judgment. When they chose continually to rebel, and so what does God do? He sends Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians to come in, and they destroy and invade Jerusalem, ultimately destroy the temple. But being an incredible leader that Nebuchadnezzar was, he took the best, the brightest, the sharpest out of the Jews and brought them into his service. The goal of this was one thing only: to transform these young men from God-fearing Jews into a king-fearing Babylonian. And ultimately, from everything from their names across the board was changed. And we saw in the first week that Daniel had a breaking point, him and his buddies. They said, we will not eat the food defiled that's been offered up to false gods. Would you test us and see that if we're not just as nourished and looking, then deal with us accordingly. And because of that, God stepped up, and we see the whole regimen of food changed in an instant. That no longer were these men given the food from the king's table, but now they would become vegetarians. And then we continue to see in week 2 that Daniel interprets this dream, that the king sees that he has surrounded himself by fools who would even confess, how can we know this dream? The gods that do not live among the men, they don't live among humans. And so the king is outraged, but Daniel once again steps up, and he doesn't say, I'm awesome. He tells his friends, we must cry out to God for mercy. And God not only gives him the interpretation of the dream, he tells Daniel the dream itself. And then in week 3, we saw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We saw how they would not bow down to the statue that this prideful king Nebuchadnezzar makes. Basically, after 20-something years after this dream, he decides, it's not good enough to be just the head of gold. He builds a 90-foot tall, 90-foot wide statue and says, everyone will bow down to me. But Daniel's, we don't know where he is at this time, but we know Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego say we're not going to bow down. And then last week, we shifted gears and we talked about King Nebuchadnezzar. After all that the king had seen, he still is choosing to not walk with the Lord. And so God humbles this man. And once again, Daniel interprets a dream of telling him what is going to happen. And we see that not only does the dream come to fruition, but in that moment, the king becomes a believer and makes a declaration to the entire empire that the God that Daniel serves is the one true God, the Most High God. He is the one that should be praised. And so we're going to jump today from chapter 4. We're going to skip chapter 5, and we're going to pick up in chapter 6. But what you need to know in this time frame, King Nebuchadnezzar is no longer the king. In fact, in chapter 5, his son is the king. He lasts one chapter. He continues to not learn takes a bunch of goblets of gold that had been taken from the temple. They all drank out of them, partied, and so his life was taken from him that night. And then we see that King Darius the Mede, took over at the age of 62. And like any good king, any good ruler, when you come into power, if you come into a new organization, what do most good leaders do? Well, they eventually begin to put people in leadership that they feel like are going to be the best for their kingdom, for their reign, for what they're trying to accomplish. And that's exactly what we see taking place when we pick up in Daniel chapter 6. So it pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom, 3 administrators over them, and one whom was Daniel. The satraps were accountable to them, so the king might not suffer loss. So right off the bat, we see that not only did King Nebuchadnezzar recognize that Daniel was a leader, but we see that Darius as well sees this. That he sees right off the bat that Daniel is one of the ones that he wants to appoint, and that he recognizes his leadership. And we continue, though, to see in verse 3, he says, this shouldn't surprise us, but now Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole entire kingdom. Okay? This is incredible, but it should not surprise us a bit, given the fact that we were told in chapter 1 that Daniel and his buddies were what? 10 times of their peers in every area. And just like any good leader, what do you do when someone shows themselves to be? Like if you give someone a task as a boss and they just kill it, what do? I know what you do. You give them more responsibility. Why? Because they've shown themselves to be faithful. They've shown themselves to be able to handle it. We don't want to put it on the person that's always dropping the ball. We want to put it on the shoulders of the one that's going to come through. And that's exactly what the king is doing here. And so at this, as you can imagine, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel and his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt or negligent. And just like in verse 3, it should come as no surprise that we see the other 2 administrators, we see the 120 satraps. They don't like the fact that Daniel is getting promoted to leadership. To these men, Daniel is still one of the exiles. He's not a Babylonian. He's not someone that was born into this. He was someone that was brought into the king's service and now is being put over them. But I love what this verse also tells us, in that they clearly states that these men are unable to find anything wrong with Daniel. In fact, they describe him as being what? Trustworthy, neither corrupt or negligent. And I just want us to pause right here for a second. I want you to think about this. Do you see how irrational people behave? I want us to all understand, the moment you get into the point where you get consumed with life and your own glory and you being on top, is the moment you'll become the person that begins to do exactly like these men and become very irrational and make decisions that are only looking out for your own interests. These men are trying to discredit a man they would describe as trustworthy. Think about that. In a day and age that we live in, when it seems like, gosh, can I really trust anyone? When you take your car to get fixed or when someone's giving you a quote, you're always in the mind, if you're really, maybe it's just me, I'm going, is someone going to be honest with me? Are they always trying to make a buck? Are they always trying to pull something over on me? That's just the world we live in. And yet these men that would describe Daniel as being trustworthy, neither corrupt or negligent, but yet because of their pride, because of their arrogance, because of their selfishness, they want to do anything to try to discredit him. And this is just craziness to me. And finally, we see that these men said, we will never find any basis or charges against him, against this man, unless it has something to do with the law of his God. And what I love about this so much is that Daniel is not just a great leader. It's one thing to be a great leader. I love what I heard one time. I think it was Louis Giglio said, our goal as parents, our goal as pastors, our goal as leaders in life is not to raise good kids, good people. It's to produce godly kids, godly leaders. There's a big difference between being good and being godly. That God desires not us just to be good. He desires us to be holy, righteous, set apart. That Daniel was a man who lived out his faith. And these men recognized it. They recognized it to the point they thought the only way we will ever get this man in trouble is if we get him and put him in a situation that would compromise his faith. And knowing this about Daniel, look at what they do. So the administrators and the satraps went as a group to the king and said, "May King Darius live forever." The royal ambassadors, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce a decree that anyone who prays to any other god or human being during the next 30 days, except for you, your majesty, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, your majesty, issue a decree, put it in writing so that it cannot be altered, in accordance to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be repealed. So King Darius put the decree in writing. And once again, we just see clearly how prideful these men are. And how wicked they are. And in some ways, just foolish. Even though they're not fools, they're smart men. And I just thought to myself this week, I'm like, have these men not seen or heard the stories of all that God has done in these men's lives and in Daniel's lives? Have they not heard and seen what happens to anyone who stands opposed to God's anointed and messes with God's anointed? But what do we see them do? We see them step out and make a very deceitful choice to trick the king in to making a law that even the king could not repeal. And so what do you think Daniel's reaction is going to be when he gets word of this news? Well, verse 10 tells us, now Daniel learned that the decree had been published. So what does he do? He went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened towards Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. I love this. Because Daniel's faith is not shaken. Daniel's not intimidated or discouraged the least by what has been handed down. And what I love about Daniel is that Daniel's not being showy. He's not being, trying to cause a scene. How do we know that? Because Scripture says 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to God, just as he had done before. This was not new. It had been one thing if he had never done this, and now it's like, oh, look at me, I'm not going to bow down. No, he continued to say, my routine is not going to change. He continues to do exactly what he did. And if you're still tempted to think that he's being showy or arrogant, verse 11 should change that. It says, then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. Who is Daniel putting his faith in? Who is he putting his trust in according to these men that are out to get him? Himself? His friends? Or the Lord? The Lord. How many times when life just throws us a curveball, do we turn to money? Do we turn to a friend? Do we turn to some substance? We turn to something other than God. And how does that work out for us? Never the way we want it to. But here we see Daniel continually trusting God, recognizing that God is the only one that has the power to do anything in this. So they went to the king and spoke to him. But the thing that we need to know is these men do not care about Daniel, nor do they care about the king, as we're going to see. So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. Did you not publish a decree? I mean, come on, seriously? Did you not publish a decree during the next 30 days that if anyone prays to a god or human except you, your majesty, they would be thrown into the lion's den? And the king answered, the decree stands in accordance to the law of the Medes and the Parisians, which cannot be repealed. If you weren't convinced that these men were a bunch of shady, prideful men, then you should be now. I mean, just look how they test the waters to see if the king is going to uphold his commands. I mean, these men were completely shady, but they were not complete idiots. They knew what they were about to ask. So they wanted to make sure the king was going to follow through. Why? Because they knew the king loved Daniel. The king respected Daniel. Daniel is the king's man. He's the guy that is about to be appointed above all the kingdom. So to make sure that he's going to honor this, and they're convinced before they would establish and throw Daniel under the bus. And they were wise to do so, because verse 13 says, then they said to the king, Daniel, who was one of the exiles. This shows, once again, they don't recognize him as one of their own. From Judah, pays no attention to your majesty or your decree that you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day. And when the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. And he was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. This absolutely confirms that these men do not like Daniel. They do not recognize him. But we also see this, and it's confirmed that they were smart in testing the waters, because the king is distraught. The king is upset. In fact, the king is trying to find any way to make this go away. But these men do not care about Daniel. And they do not care about the king. The only person they're concerned about is themselves. And we can see that. And the men went as a group to King Darius and said to him, remember, your majesty, that according to the law of the Medes and the Parisians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed. So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, may your God, whom you serve continuously, rescue you. You see, these are the kind of stories you read, you're like, is this real? Which I would say absolutely. But this is the part of the story that just shows the absolute hate and complete arrogance of these men. They could care less about Daniel, him dying. They could care less about the king being sad. The only thing they care about is one of them getting promoted to this position. But we also get a picture of the king's heart and what the king thinks about Daniel. And even though the king is honoring the law that he established, he could have easily become angry in this moment and had all those guys killed for deceiving him. But he doesn't. Instead, we see him concerned about Daniel in this moment. And what does he say? May your God, capital G, not lowercase, whom you continually serve, rescue you. This is so powerful. For starters, the king is acknowledging who Daniel worships. That he's referring when we see the capital G, he's speaking of Yahweh, the God of the Israelites, the one true God. He's not talking about Baal or Moloch. He's not talking about these other pagan little g gods. He's talking about the one true God. But we also notice that with Daniel, what does he say about Daniel? This isn't like Daniel doesn't just occasionally worship God. And I just thought to myself, man, what do we want people to say about us as saying we're Christ followers? What do I want my neighbors to say about me? Many of them are in this room. But they want me to say about me that I just worship the Lord on Sundays or on Wednesdays, or when it's convenient for me. No. When I don't have something better to do or better plans. No. I want them to say what the king said to Daniel. May your God, whom you continually serve, save you and rescue you. the God you continually serve. I want the world to see when they look at my life, that my life is leveraged for the glory of God and not for myself and my own pride and my own ambition and my own selfishness. And in verse 17, we're told that a stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and the rings of the nobles, so that Daniel's situation may not be changed. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him. And he could not sleep. I mean, this is just like unbelievable to me. I love this part of the story because even though the king loves Daniel, he follows through with what he said. Even sealing it with this ring showing this is not going to be overturned. But what should grab all our hearts is what happens next. What does the king do? He goes home and he is grieved. He does not eat. He's not drinking. He's not being entertained. He can't even sleep. And at the fact of this should have absolutely terrified the men who deceived the king. I mean, how would you like to be those guys now? The king is not wanting any food. He does not want any entertainment. They're like, man, we have poked the bear one too many times. And at first light of dawn, the king got up and he hurried to the lion's den. And when he came near the den, he called out to Daniel in an anguished voice, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions? I mean, can you imagine witnessing this? Just a newsflash. It's not honorable for kings to run. They don't run. We see this in the New Testament with the father running to the elder son. The younger brother and the prodigal son. It was shameful for a man to run. And we see the king hurrying. What do kings do? They just sit back and they are served. The king is hurrying. And not only is he hurrying, do you hear what he says? He cries out in anguish. Sounds kind of like my hoarse voice this morning. He cries out. He's grieved. He's hurting. Praying that Daniel would reply. Daniel, servant of the living God, has he been able to rescue you? And what's so incredible and powerful in this moment for all of us to take notice is this. Is when you and when I choose to live a life for the glory of God, despite when there are painful consequences. I mean, let's be honest. Like Daniel knew if he defies this, the likelihood of him going to the lion's den is very true. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they knew the furnace was awaiting them. Yet they refused to bow down. And when we choose to do this in life, here's what happens. God begins to open up doors where life-altering questions begin to be asked. When you live a life that's radically different in this world, God begins to do what only He can do. And when the Lord does what only He can do, those questions start coming. And that's exactly what happened with the king. And that's what will happen in your life. Not just in my life, in your life. You see, that's our opportunity in this world, is to take a stand. Not so we can draw attention ourselves, so that God can begin to work and show Himself to be awesome. And allow us to have open doors that we could share with people about the difference Jesus has made in our life. And how He wants to do the same in theirs. And that's exactly what Daniel did. Daniel answered, "May the king live forever. My God sent His angels and shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in His sight, nor have I done any wrong before you, Your Majesty." And I don't know about you, but this is the part of the story where I'm not addressing the king like the way Daniel did. This just shows Daniel's godly character. Daniel is like, May the king live forever. I'm like talking smack at this point. I'm like, yeah, I'm here, you punk. Why would you throw me in here? And my God spared me, and he's about to open a can on you. So you better just, do you hear me? Because it's coming. But that's why I'm not in this story. It's why I'm sitting here today. Thankfully. And just blown away. When I read this, I just go, gosh, I just can't even comprehend this. But I think about times in my own life where God's asked me to do things that didn't make any sense. When Hurricane Katrina hit in New Orleans, we were living in seminary. We were dirt poor. I mean, we made less than $10,000 that year. It is a miracle that we survived. We never missed a bill. We never missed a meal. We had over $12,000 come in the mail in scholarships that year. It was we were the most poor we'd ever been in our lives, and the most happy we've probably ever been in our marriage. And we just watched God provide and do. But when we were like displaced, all our friends were scattered all over the country. We lived with a family for 9 months, which my wife was pregnant for 6 of those months. So one day she's like, look, we've got to find something. And so then we moved into government housing. But in that, it was like, it was a no-brainer what we were supposed to do. I was like, why don't you go back to Atlanta where all your family is? You can get a job, you can do it. Like, no, because this is what God's called me to do. Like, why would you want to live here? Like, because this is where God's called me. And in that moment, sometimes I've gone back and like, why did we want to live here? I was like, because God's Spirit was alive in us and working, and it was home. Why would I step out of a job that I loved in a church that I'd been for 10 years? Where we baptized 100 high schoolers in less than 2 years. Because it wasn't about what I loved. It was about it was why I saw Craig and Veronica do today, is God had birthed in my heart to say, what would it look like to not just reach teenagers, but reach parents? And change the trajectory of the entire home. And in this moment, I go, why would these guys do this? It's because they've gripped and are holding on to the one true God who speaks life into them. And Daniel just shows respect and honor. And because of this, it's exactly why we see the king respond the way he does. It says the king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And was Daniel lifted from the den, no wound was found on him, because he had trusted his God. I mean, I can't even imagine being in there. It's like when they pulled the guys out of the fire. They pulled this man out of a lion's den, and there's not a scratch on him. There's probably not even hair on him. I thought, man, what would that be like? I'm like, man, are these things like laying up against him? Like, what in the world? Could you imagine like the anxiety that he would have had? Maybe he doesn't. I don't know. I'm thinking, man, there's not enough pills in this world to like calm my anxiety. I would be flipping out. But yet, he's brought out. And when he's brought out, everyone would see just the power and the provision of God. But at this point, this is when the story gets very interesting. You see, it didn't take the king long from shifting his concern and focus to Daniel, now to the ones that put him in this situation. And as you can imagine, it was not a good day for them. And verse 24 says, at the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought and thrown into the lion's den. Just think about this for a second. We don't know this for sure, but I'm assuming it was all 120 satraps and the 2 other officials. That is 122 men. That's a lot of people, but it's not just them. Along with what? Their wives and their children. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Can you imagine? I just thought to myself this week, if all of those men were thrown in there, how many lions do you think were in this den? Scripture says before they even touched the ground, they were crushed. And you have to know that these men were just, the guilt now that their eyes have been revealed to what the arrogance and their pride has done. In this moment, if you were wondering if it was just, man, I wonder if the lions just weren't hungry, that thrown out the window. But what I don't want you to miss here, please, is something that so many people in this life failed to recognize. And it's this: your actions in life don't just affect you. They affect everyone around you. And the greater you climb in leadership, and the more you step out and you want, the bigger and the weightier that gets. I mean, how many of us come from broken homes? I'm still, me and Abby are very thankful. Both our parents are still together. I remember when I was growing up, you're like, how many of you come from a divorced house? It'd be like one kid in the corner raising his hand. You ask teenagers that today, over 50% of the room, easy, is going to raise their hand. Broken homes. Ask them every Christmas, every Thanksgiving, every birthday, how they split time between families. How many of you at Christmas, Thanksgiving, and holidays, you feel like, man, all I do is drive my kids around to see all the different fractures of family? It's stressful. And you go, really? No, there's consequence to mess. When you do something, when you fall, everyone around you is hurt. And we see this in the fact that not only these officials and satraps are they thrown into the den, but can you imagine how sorrowful they are that now that their wives and their children are now being killed because of their arrogance? And this is something I've seen play out so many times in life. So I just want to say to all of us here, if you think you're going to do whatever you want in life, and it's not going to have a major fallout, you are lying to yourself. If you think you're going to be the guy that gets on I-35 and goes north and ends up in Corpus, it's never going to happen. You can pack your car with sunscreen. You can put boogie boards. You can have towels. You can have all the stuff. You can have all the beach supplies, fishing poles, line it up. But if you get on 35 north, you are never going to end up at the coast. Because your direction will always trump your intention. You are where your feet have taken you. And what God wants us to do is to grab to this and see this. And then we need to know that in the wake of our foolishness decisions, it always stretches greater than we could possibly imagine. But on the other hand, the great thing is this, is when we choose to leverage our lives for the glory of God and to live for the King of all kings, the wake of those decisions stretch just as far, but in a life-giving way. But the story isn't over. And God's not done showing off. You see, even though the king has now taken care of these men who deceived him, the decree is still in place that he cannot. And so what is he going to do? He's going to address it. And in verse 25, the king wrote to all the nations and the people and the language and all the earth. He says, may you prosper greatly. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom, people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus, the Persian. And I hope you recognize how incredibly powerful and how unbelievable this declaration is. This is not a Christian nation. This is not a Jewish nation. This is a pagan nation, a nation that worshiped all types of gods, a nation that practiced all types of debauchery, witchcraft, sorcery. And because of Daniel's obedience, the king is making a declaration that everyone is to fear and to have reverence for Daniel's God. And beyond that, Daniel's obedience, not only does it do that, it now has opened a door once again for the Jews to freely worship the God that they love, the God that many of them have turned their backs on. And if that wasn't enough, we continue to see Daniel get promoted, and he prospers. So as I thought about this, what would you take away from this series in our 5 weeks together? And that's this, that when our actions line up in life, what we say we believe, when your life lines up with what you say you believe, God shows up and does what only He can do. I am convinced, I am absolutely certain that the community and the world that we live in does not care and is not interested about hearing what you believe in. They don't. For the most part, they could care less. We live in a community where 50% of our community, it is never going to cross their mind today that they didn't go to church. We live in a post-Christian world. But that shouldn't scare any of us. And in fact, it should excite you for what opportunity God would place before you. Because I'm just as convinced that when we live our lives for the glory of God, those same people who are not interested about hearing what you believe are the same people that are very interested in to know why your life is different. And there's a very different thing from you telling someone what you believe and someone asking you why you're different. The moment they ask, they've invited you into their story. The moment they've asked, they have validated and given credit to your life, that they recognize something is different. And that's why we started this church. If you're new here to Epic Life and you've come in new, this is why we started. New Braunfels did not need another church. What New Braunfels needed was a people of God living out truth. To say we're going to be more than a gathering. We're going to be a people that are just as busy, if not busier, during the week living out our faith than we are here. That every week is just a celebration, like we just saw here, of what God is already doing out in our community. And I believe there's no one more equipped, no one more talented, no one more positioned better to live for the glory of God than you. It's the reason some of you are first responders. It's the reason some of you are stay-at-home moms. It's the reason some of you are ahead of the PTA. It's the reason some of you are in a boardroom every single week. It's the reason of you, some are in sales. Because God wants you, your gifts and your talents, to rub shoulders in this world. And your life would declare that God is bigger, He is better, and He is the author and giver of life. And if you feel like I'm not equipped, can I just remind you that the same Spirit that raised Jesus from the dead lives inside you. If that doesn't give you power and hope, I don't know what will. So I just want to ask you this morning, what is holding you back? What is holding you back from leaning in to who God is calling you to be? What is it? Is it fear? I think that is for most of us. Is it fear of failure? Is it fear that you don't know what to say? I mean, I hear that all the time. What about this? Could it be that you're like, Brent, I have so many issues in my life. How am I going to tell someone about Jesus? Do you know the struggles that I have? To which I would say, who is better to tell someone about Jesus than you? The fact that you are jacked up and Jesus is still crazy about you should be the very thing that gives people hope that God would still want a relationship with them. Think about it. Why do you think so many people hate coming to church? They feel like they have to be something that they're not. They have to have it all together. I'm like, man, this is the place that if we can't be honest, that our marriage is falling apart, that our kids are living in rebellion, that we're struggling with sin, then what in the world are we doing? And not that we want to celebrate that those things are happening, but my goodness, when those things are happening, man, we should be able to open ourselves up to the people of God that we call ourselves brothers and sisters with. And we do life. And we follow, that we come alongside each other. That's what our world needs to see. And that's what I want us to experience. And if you're here this morning, can I just say to you, if you've never given your life to Jesus, what Jesus wants from you is not your money. It's not behavior modification. What he wants is your heart. He wants a relationship with you. He wants you to stop trying to figure it out. Jesus wants you to recognize you don't get right to come to Jesus. You come to Jesus to get your life right. And if that's you today, I'm just going to ask you, if you want to begin a relationship with Jesus, no bowing eyes, no looking around. I'm just going to ask to be bold. I don't know why. It makes you feel nervous because no one raised your hand. You look like an idiot, but I don't care. I just all week just felt like there's someone here that needs to take this step. If that's you, I just ask, man, would you just raise your hand? Just raise your hand and say, man, just like Veronica did, just like Pablo did, just like so many have. Say, man, today is the day, Brent. I want to step out. Awesome. Anybody else? Today's the day that you want to give your life to Christ. Did you say, I want to be off the fence? And what I would say is, man, stop being afraid and turn your heart to the one who created you, who loves you. I love what God is doing here at this church because it's bigger than me. It's bigger than my personality. It's bigger than all the effort. It's bigger than anything we could have ever imagined. And the reason why is because, one, we serve an incredible God, but two, it's because of you. You are the church. You are Epic Life. You're the ones that bring your friends. You're the ones that invite your neighbors. You're the ones that are making a difference in this world. You're the ones that after the service, after you sit down, are driving to San Antonio to sit with someone in the hospital. It's not me. I got to the hospital. I was already beat to the hospital by 2 people in their small group. That's what we want. It's the church being the church. It's incredible. And my prayer is that every week we would gather, we would see and hear stories of life change. And we would recognize that we're seeing this not because we're awesome and we have it all together. It's because the one who lives in us is able and mighty to save. And my prayer for you this week and every week is that God would open all our eyes to where he is moving. And that we would see the vision of our church be fulfilled this week. That God would open our eyes and that he would begin to work. And we would see those everyday places that we are all the time become sacred spaces where people can connect to Christ. And that's what I'm praying over you and trusting. So God, we just ask in the name that is above every name, the name of Jesus. God, will we all be on mission this week? God, would we be sensitive to where you're moving? Would there be people in this room that would be set free from guilt and lies of feeling not good enough? And for the first time recognize that they are your redemptive plan for this world, that they are your ambassadors to make Christ known. And God, would you open up doors this week, and we claim that we would see these everyday places that will be all week become sacred spaces where people can connect to Christ. And so God, I just love you. I thank you for all that you're doing here. Thank you so much for your word. We thank you for stories. We thank you for the faithfulness and obedience of Daniel and his buddies, that thousands of years later, God, their story is still going on. And I pray you would open our eyes to that The reason their story is going on is because their story was not about them, but their story was leveraged for the one who writes a story and allows that story to be talked about for eternity. And so, God, we love you, and we celebrate this. We pray all this in your name. Amen.